Hello and welcome to this talk, Is It All in Your Mind?, which looks at the underlying causes of anxiety and depression. Now, I'll give you a little bit of an introduction about myself in a short while, but the first thing I want to say before we start is if you are experiencing anxiety and depression, you are not alone. If you look at mental health statistics throughout the world, you'll see that one cannot really escape the effects of anxiety and depression, whether it's yourself or whether it's someone around you, a parent, a sibling, a neighbor, friend, co-worker, or even a child. Anxiety and depression touches almost everyone at some point in their life. In fact, statistics show 1 in 4 British adults will experience at least one diagnosable mental health problem in any one given year. And if you look at the worldwide estimates, you'll see that approximately 450 million people worldwide will experience mental health issues at some point as well. So very, very difficult to escape from. Most of us at some point in our lives will experience an element of anxiety and depression. Now, the standard way in which depression and anxiety has been treated in the past is through the use of antidepressants, anti-anxiety medications, as well as talking therapies, counseling. Now, all of these have their place, but very often depression and anxiety can root from a physiological cause. And the purpose of this talk today, but also the purpose of me writing the book, is to show that there can be a lot of reasons, underlying reasons why depression and anxiety is there. And although I do believe that antidepressants and anti-anxiety medications have their place, as well as talking therapies, as long as these underlying causes are there and those root causes are not treated, the depression or anxiety or mental health issue that's there will just continue to crop up time and time again. My concern also with using antidepressants and anti-anxiety medications is that they just mask underlying problems that may be there. So although people tend to feel better, they very often don't address the real underlying cause that's there. So it's like, you know, putting a little bit of plaster or paint over a big crack in a building that has a fundamental structural problem. So I think it's really important to really investigate why the anxiety and depression is here, and that is what the talk is about today. So although there are many different reasons why the depression and anxiety might be there, and it's a little bit of investigating to find out what really is going on, today I'm going to be primarily focusing on the connection between the gut, the intestine, and the way in which you think, feel, and even behave. This is a very, very interesting connection, and it has been well researched, and I think many therapists who have worked in this area will tell you how strong and profound this connection can be. But just to give an example, most of us are aware of the neurotransmitters or hormones that your doctors will talk about in terms of depression and anxiety. So hormones such as serotonin, which is your feel-good hormone, acetylcholine and dopamine, these are all hormones that very much affect the way that we think and feel. Now, most of us tend to think that those are produced in the gut, and are surprised to find that more than 90% of the body's serotonin is produced and used, so found in the gut. That's 90% of your feel-good hormone is produced in the gut. So what does that really mean? Does it matter where it's produced and where it's used? Well, yes, it does, because if your intestine isn't functioning in the way that it should be, it means that many of these neurotransmitters don't get produced properly. They don't, many of the receptors are destroyed for these hormones to link to. And so what you find is that any condition that alters the functioning of the gut, any inflammatory type of gut condition, will affect the way in which our hormones are produced, and these hormones affect the way we think, the way we feel, and the way we behave. But before I continue explaining how the gut and the mind connection works, let me tell you my own story. I was plagued with anxiety and depression probably from the age of 14, but maybe even younger than that. And I struggled for many, many years with an unexplained anxiety and depression. And my parents, not really knowing what to do with me, sent me to a lot of different talking therapies, trying to really resolve what it was, because on the surface life was good, everything was fine, there were no problems at home. I really shouldn't have been experiencing the anxiety and depression that I was. And when I was 26 years old, I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease, which is a autoimmune gut disorder. And at that time, my depression and anxiety was really also on quite an extreme scale. And I was still functioning. In fact, I had a pretty good job. I was working. But on some level, this anxiety and depression just stopped me on so many levels from doing the things that I really wanted to do in life. So at the time that I was diagnosed with this Crohn's, the prognosis wasn't very good. I was basically told that I would have a life of steroid use as well as surgery to remove parts of the intestines, and that was what lay ahead for me. And I really wanted to find a different solution. I was working in pharmaceutical area at that time, so I knew what the effects of long-term steroids would mean for me, and I wanted to find a different route. And this is when I tried traditional Chinese medicine, and it took a while. It took about a year, but my Crohn's resolved. And when my Crohn's resolved, I noticed that the anxiety and the depression had lifted as well. At the time, I was also looking for a career change. I no longer wanted to work in the pharmaceutical area, so I headed off to Asia, where I studied traditional Chinese medicine for 3 years. And one of the really interesting things I learned there was that anxiety and depression in traditional Chinese medicine is often treated, first of all, by looking at how the digestive system is functioning. And at first I thought this was absolutely crazy. Why would you treat the digestive system when somebody's coming in with depression and anxiety? But the more I could see results in our clinic, in the method in which people were treated, and they were lasting results, the more I got really curious about how that connection works. And so when I went to go and research it, I found that there was a mass of data out there already, not just from traditional medicine, but from Western medicine as well. And so what seemed to be the main finding was that in embryo development, you'll find that as the cells begin to differentiate into the type of organs they're going to form, the organs, the brain and the digestive system form from the same cell lines, which means that the cells remain fairly similar throughout the development, even when we develop into fully grown adults. Your brain cells and your digestive cells are very, very, very similar in the way in which the receptors work and the way in which those cells function. Now, that's very interesting because you'll find that you cannot look at either of these cells in isolation. Any kind of chemical change that's going to affect the intestine will affect the brain, and vice versa. Any change in the brain will affect affect the digestive system. And I think it's once you start to see this connection between the way your digestive system is working and the way that you're thinking and feeling, you begin to realize just how very powerful this mind-gut connection is. You'll start to notice that what you're feeding into the intestine is what you're feeding into your brain cells as well. So at that stage, things like diet and intestinal health becomes really, really important. So once again, any condition that will affect the digestive system will affect the way in which your mind thinks, and the other way around as well. I mean, one of the most common examples are the butterfly feeling people get before a stressful event, so before an exam or giving a public speech. Most of us are aware of the butterfly feeling in the stomach. Now that's your mind, the chemical changes happening in your brain that, preparing for what's going on, affecting the digestive system in the bowels. But that connection works the other way around as well. So anything that affects the digestive system in the intestine is going to produce that feeling of anxiety or depression in the brain. So, very often anxiety can be a result of what's happening in the intestine, those signals going between the brain and the body. So even though there is no actual event that you're preparing for, your digestive system is sending those signals up to the brain. So really, really close connection between how the mind and how the gut works. Now, a couple of really interesting facts when we look at brain-gut connection, and we see children of women with high levels of antibodies to gluten, that means they're sensitive to gluten, have almost a doubled risk of later in life developing a psychiatric disorder. So this is interesting because we tend to think of a gluten sensitivity as being a primarily digestive issue. But look, if you look at the psychiatric effects that come with it, or the mental effects that come with it, you start to realize that it's a lot more than just a digestive issue. Also, patients with celiac disease, that means they don't tolerate gluten well, have a higher risk for depression, autism, and schizophrenia. And I've got lots of interesting case studies about this in the book as well, especially relating to schizophrenia and celiac disease. I've seen this very commonly. Patients with Crohn's disease, this is a digestive disease as well, are more susceptible to depression and anxiety. And even things like lactose intolerance in the gut links to depression. And I had one case a few years ago which was really interesting. A woman had come in with very, very severe depression, and in fact her children had been taken away from her because of the level of depression that was there. And in her case, we managed to very quickly ascertain that the problem was lactose intolerance. And as soon as she stopped drinking milk products, within a few weeks the depression lifted, and a couple of months later she had her kids back. And I think this is one of the most profound ones that I've seen. And then finally, gut bacteria affect the way you feel and think. Now, this is there's been a few really good studies recently which have shown that the type of bacteria that grow in your intestine can affect the way you feel and the way you think as well. And so, researchers took samples of the intestinal flora, the little bacteria that grow in the intestine, and then also link that to the kind of mental symptoms that people had. The reason for that is these bacteria in the intestine play a huge role in how the gut functions overall. And when these little bacteria are missing from the digestive system or missing from the body, we often find that the intestine doesn't function to the optimal level. And once again, that will start to affect the neurotransmitter levels, and that can affect the way you think and feel. So, I think we really need to look at a holistic reason for why people are affected with anxiety and depression, and try and find underlying causes rather than just using medications. So now, if that is the case, that chemicals, any chemical change in the intestine or the brain will affect one or the other, we can clearly see that when we look at the side effects of antidepressants. So in this case, I've listed one of them, citalopram, which is quite a common one. And when you look at the side effects, you see that a huge amount of them are digestive. So you've got nausea and diarrhea, dry mouth, which is there as well, colitis, gastric ulcers, rectal hemorrhage that's bleeding from the anus, dyspepsia, diverticulitis, pancreatitis, cholecystitis, so inflammation of the gallbladder, gallstones, gastritis. Most of the side effects, although not all of them, will directly link into the digestive system and digestive function. Another interesting one as well there, you might see at the bottom, is increased suicide risks, which always make me laugh, but in fact it's not a joke. Many of the antidepressants in the first few weeks of taking them does increase the risk for suicide, especially in young people. So that's one thing that doctors really have to watch out for, is an increased risk of suicide, even in those who had no suicide risk before. Starting to take antidepressants can lead to an increased risk for suicide. Here again, a study looked at 26,000 people on antidepressants, and here we see that there's 3.6 times more upper gastrointestinal bleeding episodes with the use of these antidepressants. So we can see that definitely these medications have a strong effect on the gut. And in fact, there's quite a lot of interesting research showing that a lot of medications for the gut also directly have an influence on our mental health as well. So these are closely correlated. So one of the things we do at the Centre for Holistic Health is to look at the individual holistically. We're patient-centered, so although we've got a team of therapists, we really look at what the patient needs and get them to the right therapist. And then we try and get to the underlying reason of why that anxiety or depression might be there. And there can, like I said, be a variety of reasons. Today I've only touched very quickly on the mind-gut connection, but there's many other reasons why it could be there. It could be a reactive type of depression. You've lost a family member or a friend, or there's some, there's a trauma that you've been through. It could be something like a food intolerance. It could be a reaction to a certain type of medication. It could be a variety of different reasons. We see there's some metabolic syndromes which also lead to anxiety and depression, and we aim to really get to the root of what's causing it and to find solutions for people. I'd like to thank you for listening to this recording today. Also encourage you to have a look at the book, Is It All in Your Mind? It's a really good resource for determining what may be lying underneath the depression and anxiety. We also have an online questionnaire that you can fill in. It does take about an hour, but it might give you some clues as to what the underlying causes may be. But the message I'd like to leave you with is, don't always just accept that anxiety and depression is a mental illness, or that you just need to pull yourself together. There very often is physiological reasons why this may be the case, and I'd like to encourage you to get to the bottom of those, find out what's going on, and get it sorted. Thanks for listening today.